State Road 67 runs southwest out of Portland, Indiana, through Redkey and Albany, and on toward Muncie. 2 lanes, no shoulder to speak of, gravel drives every quarter mile. On a Tuesday night in November of 2024 at 11:40, a maroon pickup came down it toward Redkey with one headlight burned out. The bulb had failed on the passenger side. A $4 part. In Indiana, it is a Class C infraction, and most officers write a warning for it. That bulb ended a 15-year lie, put a man in a cell, and told a family in Pennville where their brother had been the entire time they were being told he was a thief. The patrolman was Dwight Marbaugh, 34, 6 years on. He made the stop the way he made $40 a month. He was not suspicious of the driver. He did not have a hunch. He had a burned-out bulb, a license that had expired 3 years earlier, and a registration address he happened to know personally, because he had watched the house at that address get torn down. The name on the license was Vern Teeters. Vern. He farmed 240 rented acres of corn ground north of Pennville and kept the books for the Salamonia Township Volunteer Fire Department. He was last seen on the 6th of April, 2009. 9 days later, $61,400 was missing from the fire department's account, and everyone in 3 townships decided they knew exactly why Vern Teeters was gone. Tonight, a checkbox on a court order that nobody filled in, a legal notice printed 3 times in a weekly paper that nobody read, a mail carrier who reported the same thing twice and was told it was not a postal matter, and a concrete pad poured 15 days after a man disappeared, with a permit on file the whole time. Start with the stop itself, because there is almost nothing in it. That is the point. Marbaugh was parked in the gravel apron of a closed implement dealer south of Redkey running plates as traffic went by. The pickup passed him at 11:39. He pulled out, followed it 4/10 of a mile, and lit it up at the county line road. The truck pulled over immediately and correctly. No braking hard, no drifting, no throwing anything out the window. Marbaugh has said since that if the man had done any one thing wrong in those 4/10 of a mile, he would have been arrested that night and identified that night. Instead, he did everything right, and it took 90 minutes longer. The driver had both hands on the wheel before the officer reached the window. He had the license out. He was polite. He was 55 years old, grey, thin in the face, with a white scar through one eyebrow. Marbaugh asked him where he was headed. He said Muncie. Then he said he was going to see about a truck in Albany. Then he said he was just driving. The license was worn soft at the corners, the way a card gets after 15 years in the same wallet. It had expired in 2021. It was not fake. It had never been fake. It was a real Indiana driver's license, issued by the state, renewed twice by mail, in the name of a man who had been dead since the spring of 2009. Marbaugh went back to his car and ran it. Here's what came back. Driving status expired. Registration valid, current, paid. Address a rural route north of Pennville. Warrants none. Missing persons nothing. Deceased flag nothing. Nothing at all. The state of Indiana had no opinion about Vern Teeters except that he needed to renew his license. What stopped him was the address. Marbaugh grew up 4 miles from it. He knew the farm, he knew the lane, and he knew that the house on it had been pushed into its own basement and burned by the fire department as a training exercise in 2019. He walked back up to the window and asked the man where he lived. The man gave him the address of a house that no longer existed. Go back to April of 2009. It had been the wettest spring in a decade, and nobody was in the field. Vern Teeters was 51, unmarried, farming rented ground, and hauling his own grain. He had a sister in Pennville, Maryland, and a nephew, and a seasonal hired man who lived in a trailer at the end of his lane. The hired man was Ronnie Bricker, 40 years old. He had come through in the fall of 2006 looking for combine work and stayed on for 3 harvests. He was quiet, he was competent, and nobody in Pennville could tell you one thing about him beyond that. He had no family in the county. He was paid partly in cash. He lived alone in a 14-foot trailer with no phone. On the afternoon of April 6th, Vern hauled the last of his stored corn to the elevator at Bryant, 11 miles east. 812 bushels. He was paid to his own account. That evening, a neighbor saw his yard light on at 9. On April 7th, nobody saw him, which was not strange. On April 8th, nobody saw him, which was a little strange. On April 9th, a typed letter arrived at the home of the fire chief, Earl Mutispore. 1 paragraph. It said that Vern Teeters was resigning as treasurer of the Salamonia Township Volunteer Fire Department, effective immediately for personal reasons, and that he was sorry. It was signed. It was not handwritten. In 2009, in a township of 1,100 people, that was not suspicious. It was just rude. 6 days later, the department went to draw on its account for a pump rebuild and found $61,400 gone. 3 transfers on the 4th, the 7th, and the 8th of April to an account at a bank in Muncie that had been opened in February. Every one of them was authorized with the treasurer's signature and the treasurer's account credentials. Marilyn Teeters Good filed a missing person report on April 15th. A deputy took it at her kitchen table and wrote it up honestly, including the part she told him, because she thought it mattered, that the fire department money was gone and people were saying her brother took it. The report was entered as a voluntary adult absence. That is a real category, and it was, on the facts available that week, the correct one. 7 years passed. In February of 2016, a self-storage operator in Portland had a unit that had been unpaid since 2010, rented in Vern's name with a lien he could not clear because the renter was neither present nor legally dead. So he did the ordinary thing. He petitioned the J Circuit Court to have Vernon Teeters declared presumed dead. Lou Spangle was not being sinister. He had 31 units, one of them full of a stranger's furniture, and a lawyer in Portland who told him the cheapest way through it was a presumption of death. Indiana requires 7 years of unexplained absence, a diligent search, and published notice. Spangle's petition ran 3 weeks in the legal notices of the county's weekly paper. Nobody appeared. Nobody objected. The notice was 7 lines of 6-point type between a sheriff's sale and a drainage board hearing. Marilyn Teeters Good did not see it. She had stopped taking the paper in 2012. She has been asked about that in the years since more than once by people who meant it kindly and by people who did not. And she has said the same thing every time. Nobody called her. There was no requirement that anybody call her. Indiana law asks a petitioner for diligent inquiry into the absent person's whereabouts. Diligent inquiry is not defined. In practice, in 2016, in a county of 20,000 people, it meant a lawyer's affidavit and 3 weeks of 6-point type. The sister lived 8 miles from that courthouse, and her phone number was in the book. On the 11th of August, 2016, the court entered a decree of presumed death. The decree form has a block at the bottom for transmittal, vital records, Social Security, and a line with a box beside it for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. The box beside the Bureau of Motor Vehicles was not checked. It was not checked because there is no rule that says it has to be. Phyllis Osterman has worked in that clerk's office since 1989. In 2024, a detective asked her how a dead man kept a driver's license, and she pulled the file and turned it around on the counter so he could see it himself. Her answer, in full, was this: the decree went where the statute says it goes. The license is a different agency. Nobody has ever built a wire between them. So the record stayed alive, and somebody kept it alive on purpose, and it cost him about $80 a year to do it. Vern's license was renewed by mail in 2013, and again in 2017. Renewal by mail in that window required a payment and a signature and no photograph. The truck's plates were renewed every year, on time, for 15 years. Here is the part of this case that has no paperwork in it. For 15 years, the accepted local fact was that Vern Teeters stole $61,000 from a volunteer fire department and left. His nephew Cody grew up under that. He lost a job over the name in 2014 and did not fight it because he had been told his whole life that it was true. That is what the $61,000 actually bought. Not a head start and not a new life somewhere warm. It bought a story. It gave 400 people in 2 townships a complete, satisfying, self-explaining answer to the question of where Vern Teeters went. And it held for 15 years without anybody having to check it once. Loretta Shuey drove rural Route 2 out of Pennville for 22 years. 410 boxes, 68 miles, 6 days a week. Everyone calls her Retta. She is the only person in this case who noticed anything at all. And she noticed it in 2011, 13 years before Officer Marbour saw a burned-out headlight. A rural carrier knows a route the way a nurse knows a ward. Retta Shuey knew which boxes got magazines, which got nothing but flyers, which farms had a dog, and which people were sick because she could see it in what they ordered. She knew Vern Teeters' handwriting because for 9 years he left outgoing mail in the box with the flag up, addressed by hand. In 2011, a natural gas company sent certified notice to every landowner along a pipeline right-of-way about vegetation clearing. The card came back signed. The signature on it was block capitals. Vern Teeters had signed the original easement for that same company in 2008, and that signature is a tight, forward-leaning cursive. Both cards sat in the same file, in the same office, for the next 13 years. Retta Shuey did not see either of those cards. What she saw was simpler. Starting in the summer of 2009, the outgoing mail in the box at the end of the Teeters lane was addressed in block capitals, and there was less of it, and it never went to the sister in Pennville anymore. And a man she did not know was the one walking out to get it. Twice, once in September of 2009 and once in March of 2010, she wrote it up. Not as a crime. There is a form for a delivery discrepancy, and she filed it, and on the second one, she wrote a sentence in the margin about a signature that did not match. Both were closed. Mail was reaching the address. The box was not vacant. That is the entire test. She kept the steno pad. 15 years in a drawer, because that is what you do when you have written something down twice and been told twice that it is not your department. In November of 2024, a detective sat in that kitchen and read it. Retta Shuey asked her one question, and it is the only question she has ever asked about this case. Would it have mattered? Back to the roadside, 11:52 at night. The man in the pickup had given an address that did not exist. His license was expired, which meant the truck could not be legally driven away, which meant a tow, which meant an inventory, which meant a report. And a report requires positive identification of the driver. Marbour's department bought 4 handheld fingerprint readers in 2022 with a federal equipment grant. 2 fingers on a lit pane of glass, a state and federal search, a result in 90 seconds. It is the least glamorous piece of hardware in a patrol car. He asked. The man said yes. He put 2 fingers on the glass. There was no obligation to consent and no penalty for refusing. Marbour has been asked what he would have done if the answer had been no, and his answer is that he would have written the citation, called the tow truck, and let the man walk to a gas station, because that is all an expired license and a burned-out bulb gets you. 90 seconds later, the reader returned a name, and it was not Vern Teeters. It was Ronnie D. Bricker, and it came from a fingerprint card taken at the Delaware County Jail in 1997, when a 28-year-old farmhand was booked for conversion over a stolen chainsaw and released on $100. That misdemeanor was resolved in 7 weeks and cost him $100. It is the only mark Ronnie Bricker ever made on any record system in his life. County jails keep the cards, not for a term of years, not until a case closes. They keep them. The chainsaw was gone, the judge was dead, the courthouse had been remodeled twice, and the card was still in the drawer. He was arrested at 12:41 in the morning on identity deception and false informing. 2 misdemeanors and a low-level felony. In the interview room, he was told his own name. He did not deny it, he did not confirm it, and he did not speak again for 11 days, except to ask whether the truck had been towed and whether anybody had fed the dog. Detective Anita Chalfant got it the next morning, and she has been clear about what the case looked like on that first day. A small-time identity theft with an obvious money motive and no body, no crime scene, no witness, and a 15-year head start. She did not go looking for a murder. She went looking for the last day anybody could prove Vern Teeters was alive. She found it at the elevator in Bryant, in a cardboard box in an office attic, and it exists for a reason that has nothing to do with this case. The elevator was sold in 2013. When a licensed grain facility changes hands, the seller's records go into the deal as warranty documentation. Everything from the last 10 years of operation got boxed, labelled, and put upstairs, and then nobody threw it away. Junior Dehoff ran the scale house at Bryant for 31 years. He is 71, and he remembers Vern Teeters as a man who backed a wagon better than his own son could. He went up the attic stairs himself and came down with the box for April of 2009, and it took him about 4 minutes to find what the detective wanted. Ticket 118904, April 6th, 2009. In at 4:12 in the afternoon, out at 4:41. 812 bushels credited to Teeters' account, signed in the tight forward-leaning cursive. Ticket 118961, April 8th. Same account. Same truck. In at 7:58 in the morning. Signed in block capitals. Grain warehouses licensed by the state keep scaled tickets for 6 years. By any rule that ever applied to that building, those 2 tickets should have been destroyed in 2015. They survived because a business changed hands, and a lawyer wanted the seller's paper kept where it could be produced, and because Junior Dehoff carried the boxes up those stairs himself and would not have thrown them out anyway. That is the whole hinge of this case, and it is a piece of pink carbon paper the size of a postcard. On the 6th of April, 2009, at 12 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, Vern Teeters was alive and signing his own name. 40 hours later, somebody else was driving his truck, using his account, and signing for his grain. The 3 transfers out of the fire department account were dated the 4th, the 7th, and the 8th of April. Only the first one happened while Vern Teeters was demonstrably alive. Earl Muterspore was told this in a fire station in Pennville on the 20th of November 2024, 15 years after he took Vern's name off the plaque on that wall with a screwdriver and a pair of pliers. Chalfant now had a 40-hour window and a farm. What she needed was something on that farm that could be dated inside it. Building permits are permanent records. Every county keeps them forever because a permit is the answer to a question somebody will eventually ask about a structure. So she pulled the file on the Teeters place, and there was one. Permit 09-0413. Issued the 17th of April, 2009, for a reinforced concrete pad and footing ring for a 30,000 bushel grain bin. Applicant V. Teeters, signed for at the counter by an agent. A hired man, which was normal, and the hired man printed his own name in block capitals, which was also normal, and nobody ever looked at it again. The inspector on the job was Wendell Gibbs. He is 74 now. He signed off 900 pads in that county and remembers none of them. And he did not need to remember because he wrote it down. Poured the 21st of April, 2009. Inspected and approved the 22nd. And a note in his own hand in the margin. The note said, center sump omitted Perona, excavation backfilled prior to pour. A grain bin pad of that size is designed with a sump pit in the middle for the unload conveyor. The hole for it had been dug. Then, at the owner's direction, it was not built. It was filled back in, and 400 cubic yards of concrete went over the top of it. Nobody found that suspicious in 2009, and nobody should have. Farmers cut items out of a bin project constantly, usually because the quote came back high. Gibbs wrote the change down because writing things down was the job, and then the card went into a folder in a basement and waited 15 years for somebody to ask it a question. 15 days after Vern Teeters signed his last scale ticket, a 4-foot hole in the middle of his own building site was backfilled and sealed under a concrete floor on a permit taken out in his name by a man who was already signing for his grain. Charfant has said she read the margin note 3 times and then sat in the dark for a while. The bin came down first. 52 feet of corrugated steel, empty since 2022, taken apart in a day and a half by a crew out of Hartford City. On the 27th of November, 2024, a saw cut a 9x9 square out of the middle of that pad, and a small excavator lifted the slab out in 4 pieces. 2 feet of loose backfill, then a nylon feed sack, and then Vern Teeters, 51 years old, wearing the plaid shirt and the canvas vest his sister described to a deputy in April of 2009. Cause of death was a single blunt injury to the back of the skull. He had been there for 15 years and 7 months, 90 feet from his own back door. Ronnie D. Bricker was charged with murder on the 6th of December, 2024. He has not spoken about it. The money is gone and has been gone since 2010. Marilyn Teeters Good buried her brother on the 14th of December in Pennville, 400 yards from the fire station. She was 62. She had spent 15 years defending a man she was told had robbed his neighbors. Loretta Shuey retired in 2023, 19 months before the traffic stop. She had delivered mail to that box for 8 years after Vern Teeters died, and she has said that she does not know where a person is supposed to put that. In February of 2025, the Salamonia Township Volunteer Fire Department put a name back on a plaque. It took 11 minutes and 2 screws. Nothing in this case was hidden. The fingerprint card was in a drawer. The decree was in a courthouse. The tickets were in an attic. The permit was in a basement. Loretta Shuey wrote it down twice in 2009 and filed it with the only office that would take it. All it needed, for 15 years, was one $4 bulb to burn out in front of the right patrol car.